Madam Chair, we have a vacancy as the vice chair, and I would like to take this opportunity to nominate Justine Huang to be our new vice chair.
Okay. Melissa, do you have a
I
comment?
was just going to say, we don't have that on the agenda. I was waiting, or I thought we would wait till we have a full membership to do that, but
Do we want to just take a vote?
We cannot.
Oh, we can't because it's not on the agenda. All right, we'll
Yeah.
add it to the agenda next meeting and we'll move forward.
Okay, and so do I have, will this be considered a nomination for the next meeting?
when it's an agenda item, you can say what you said tonight.
Okay, so
Yep.
I have to re-say it. Okay.
Yes.
Thank
Sounds
you.
like it. Okay.
But I do want to thank Justine. It was a wonderful event.
It was amazing.
And
Yep,
it
was.
is our first annual Lunar New Year Festival, and I think the next one will be even bigger.
I
Thank
think
you,
there was
Justine.
1,000 people. It was amazing. Yep. Okay. All right, so let's move into, right to Jen Goldson for the discussion of the metrics for the goals.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm happy to see you all again. I hope everyone had nice holidays and a good January so far. I wanted to first just introduce you to Beverly Mesa-Zent, who is our new senior community planner. She's going to be assisting on this project, and she's had a lot. Actually, I'd love for you to introduce yourself as well, but I'll just let you know we're really excited to bring her onto the Jam Goldson team. She has a lot of long-range planning experience, really all over the country, and I think she's going to be really helpful on this project as we move into the strategy phase in particular. So maybe you could say a few words.
So, good evening, Chair and Steering Committee members. I'm very glad to be here supporting the Jam Goldson team. I have worked in Texas. I went to graduate school at UNH, but due to military career of my spouse, I spent most of my career in Texas and then moved to Washington, where I worked for 6 years, and then most recently coming to you from Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where I was Director of Planning, and now I'm moving into the private sector. In Washington, I worked as Deputy Director of Planning for the city of Redmond. So I've done a lot on the municipal side, and in Redmond, I manage long-range planning, and so I have quite a bit of experience with long-range planning and look forward to supporting this effort. So thank you.
And so you'll see, basically, you'll see me and Beverly at all these meetings now, and you'll get to know her as well. All right, so the first thing I just wanted to do, actually, Connor, if you could bring up the schedule first. Just want to go through the schedule. I know that we handed this out at the December meeting for the schedule for both Phase 3 and Phase 4 to basically bring you across the finish line. But we didn't get a lot of chance to talk about it because we were so focused on the vision statement that night. So I really just wanted to make sure that, and I'll go through this briefly, but really what I want to know is, does this schedule make sense? Do you have any questions? And then I really want to focus in on what these technical working sessions will be like and why we're proposing to do them, and would love to get some direction on who to invite. And Melissa will have a few things to say on that as well, because she's already started to work on that. But I didn't make copies for everyone because I know that we had them from the last time, so I thought I'd save on paper, but we do have it up on the screen if you don't recall. So Connor, if you could just start at the beginning of it. I'm just going to just run down the Phase 3 schedule to start. And so, of course, we're starting Phase 3 tonight, and we'll be talking about the draft metrics and goals, and then we'll also talk about those core theme working sessions. Then in another week and a half or so, our consultant team is actually getting together in my office to really start to brainstorm. We're going to look really carefully back at the vision statement and the goals and start to come up with strategy ideas that could help you achieve that vision. And what our plan is to come up with really as many ideas as we can think of to give you a kind of a broad range of possibilities, and then come back to you in February on the February 23rd meeting, which will be our next meeting together, and really discuss what those options are. And we're going to have the whole consulting team here that night. We'll have Actually, it'll be Chris Herlick from RKG Associates, who many of you met at the forum, I think, in October, if anybody remembers his presentation. And then there'll be Juliet Walker here as well from Kittleson. And then Beverly and I, of course, will also be here. And we're going to present to you the ideas for you to talk about, think about, ask questions about. And we're going to have ideas for each of the core themes. So it'll be a pretty meaty meeting, but the decision-making it's a bit of a low bar in terms of decision-making. We don't need to know necessarily which strategies you want to pursue for the master plan. What we want to know is which ones do you think the technical working session should talk about? So that's the question. It doesn't mean that other things are going to be off the table. We just want to narrow down to a list of, we're thinking about 10 strategies for each core theme that we'll bring to the technical working sessions to get their feedback on. So it's going to be a process of narrowing which ones really need to be talked about. And we'll give you the list of ideas that we come up with. We set an internal deadline for ourselves of February 9th. And so you'll have some time. We wanted to give you plenty of time to digest and look at them and come up with, if you have any questions, you're welcome to email me, and of course copy Melissa and Jennifer on any emails to me, but just if you have questions as you're looking at them, I'm happy to give you some answers in between the meetings so that when you come to the meeting, you're prepared and have some opinions on which ones you think warrant further discussion. Does that make sense just in general? Okay. And then we have the technical working sessions in March. So you don't have a master plan steering committee meeting in March, because we want you to come to these working sessions. And I want to talk about them in a little bit more depth in a moment, but I'm going to keep going through the rest of the schedule so you can see how the flow will be after that. And then I want to come back to the technical working sessions and what your role will be and talk a bit about who you think should be included and invited. All right. And then if you go to the next page, Connor, the beginning of the next page, Phase 3 will continue with another meeting in April 27th with you guys, and what we're going to do is review the key takeaways from those technical working sessions. What did the groups think about those 10 ideas? Did they come up with other ideas? And we want to discuss, your thoughts of those takeaways and give us any direction. And we'll facilitate that conversation. And then between mid-April, I have April 21st, but that's not a magic date. I just wanted you to start doing this in mid-April, and I wanted to give you a full 4 weeks. We'd like to ask each of you to go out to various boards and commissions. It could be boards or commissions that you sit on. It could be others. And we'd like to get as many get you on as many agendas of Braintree boards and commissions as possible to do what we call a road show. And basically, we're going to give you either handouts or a PowerPoint. We can talk about the format and what you're comfortable with. But we want to give you some material to present at these various boards so that hopefully you can get to every board in that month between all of you and share where we are in the process, what kind of strategies we're talking about that might be relevant to that board that you're presenting to, and just get some feedback from every board and commission in Braintree during that month. So we're setting the bar high, and we're looking for your help with that. And I hope that will, you'll be in agreement of doing that, because it's, using a little bit of your time getting on these agendas and going out and presenting. And again, we can talk more about format and what you need to do that, but that's the idea of it. And then in May, we'll want to have the department managers working session where we look at the short list of strategies that we're ending up with and really getting a better sense of implementation capacity, funding, staffing needs, if there are any ideas that they feel are just not feasible or present barriers, if there's anything they particularly like, or maybe initiatives that they are looking to start. Maybe they've already started working on some of them. So we just want to talk with department heads about feasibility and capacity. And I know, Melissa, we talked about some dates. I don't know if that's actually been set.
We have put together, Connor primarily, we have a grid of all of the meetings that will take place between those dates. And we can work with those boards to, most of them out of the planning office. to get those scheduled. And then we haven't started on the May stuff yet, but we'll compile a list and start working on that as well.
Perfect. And we're hoping to do that department managers working session that first week in May, if we can get the department managers to agree on a date. And then May 18th, we'll meet with you again, and we'll review what we learned from the department managers. And this whole process is a process of narrowing, essentially. And so by the time we come to you in May, we'll have a better sense of what's feasible, where the gaps are there things that are just not realistic, or are there things that are perhaps not out of the question, but we need to do, make assumptions about additional staff or additional funding sources that perhaps the town needs access to. So that'll be the May 18th meeting where we'll present that and talk with you all about it. And then we're hoping to come out of that May 18th meeting with a short list that you feel good about. And then we'd like to post that short list of strategies on the project website and ask for the public to just weigh in, review the strategies, weigh in if there's any feelings, one way or the other about the short list. And then on June 15th, we'd like to take the short list, present to the, it'll be just like we've done in the past. It'll be your meeting, and you'll invite the planning board and town council to attend. And we'll take public comment as well and just get a feeling on where we are with those strategies. And that's the end of phase 3. And then I think I'll just move into phase 4, and then I think we can come back so you can see how we'll wrap this up. So phase 4 on the next page, yep, thank you, will happen from July through November, and it'll basically be pulling the plan together. It'll be the first time you actually see what you're going to call your plan. We'll start to format it, we'll populate, we'll discuss what kind of formatting options you want, we'll give you some examples. And so the first meeting of that phase, in July, we'll send you some options for layouts. We'll send you, some plans that we've worked on before. You can also bring plans that we haven't done. We're not wed to any one way of looking or putting it together. And then on the July 20th meeting, we want to discuss with you those options and see what we'll talk about. We'll get into some details here, like do you want landscape or portrait, like all those things. It's important because the look of this plan is not just aesthetic, it's really getting at how readable is it, how accessible is it, does it feel like your town as well? The look of it is really about what, it's also a branding in a lot of ways for the project. And then in August, we'll send the first draft of it to you. We'll populate it with the strategies, the short list of strategies. We'll populate it with the goals and the vision that you've already talked about. We'll do a very brief summary from the existing conditions report. We just bring in some of the key findings. It might even only be a page or two. And then we'll bring that to you in August to review that draft. And then we'll go ahead and revise it based on your comments. We'll give that revision to you in, it looks like the second week of September, by September 7th. And then we're suggesting that at that point you post the draft on the project website to get public feedback. And then we'll come to you again in September 21st, to present the draft plan, then including the planning board and the town council. Make additional revisions at that point if that's needed. That'll also be public comments taken on September 21st. And then in October, we would suggest you consider voting to recommend the plan to the planning board. And then it would go to the planning board in November. And that's when we step out of the process. And typically in our experience, it's been because the planning board has been involved throughout each of these phases. At that point, we have not seen any issues, knock on wood, and the plan is typically approved at the planning board without any additional help on our end. And then we change draft to final, and it's done. So let me just pause there. I know I just covered a lot. Does the flow of this make sense and kind of the approach that we're taking? Does anyone have questions or concerns? Yes, Justine?
Can you please speak into the microphone?
Yes. Just for the September 7th, where you have post-draft on website for public comment, is there any plan or on the schedule how those comments will be incorporated?
Yeah, so at the September 20, so people can write, as we've been taking written comments all along. People can email, I think they're going to Melissa. And then we'll also take public comments at the September 21st meeting. In addition to each time the planning board and town council is invited, we take public comments at those meetings. And then if there are comments that would indicate more revisions, we would want you to give us some guidance on what those revisions should be. And then we'd be, happy to make those revisions before presenting to you on October 19th for your approval. But we would just need at that September 21st meeting, if there are substantive comments that you want to discuss, you would want some time on September 21st to discuss. At the same thing, when we present the short list of strategies on June 15th, you'll want some time on the agenda to just discuss what you've heard. And if there are any changes you want to make to the short list, then I'll want you to give us direction.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Just going back to the public comment perspective is, do we have any way, do we plan to communicate to the public, say they have the right of where they can make their comments? I know we go through a lot of the meetings with public, and that's how we got the feedback and surveys. But at this point, I don't think public knows that they're able to put more input into it. So I just want to make sure that we had the method to do so, and the public aware of they have the choice to do so.
My comment would be, so your direction is that if we get public input, that we consider that public input, that we
Yes.
make modifications based upon public input?
Mhm.
Okay, good. That's just,
But you'd need
Just
to
clarifying.
agree on it,
Yeah.
of course, yeah.
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 Madam Chair?
Yes,
If I may, I was curious to Jen if there's an option to include a comment portal on the website, so that if people are accessing, that's where everybody goes. There's all our names are there and where to find us, but if there's an easy option, if they're looking at the plan, if there's like a, provide a comment, and they can just dial it in, right there.
I think we can do that,
If
sure.
that's an option, that will make it easier for people, then, oh, no, I gotta go email somebody, or I gotta write it down, and then everything's kind of centralized.
Yeah, yeah, we'd be happy to do that. And I guess I need to look into this, but I know we can do that anonymously, but I'm assuming that you'll want people to attach their name to their comments, correct? So I just want to double check that there's a way to ask them. There probably is. I just don't want to say there is without checking.
Yeah, I mean, some of the comments and the survey and all that was anonymous. I'm not sure how people feel. I mean, a comment is a comment, as long as it's relative and it's helpful to the committee. It would be nice
Yeah.
if we knew where it was coming from, but,
yes.
Director Santucci. I want to substantiate the comments that they are relative, that they're Braintree residents. I'm concerned about, one comment, one individual. So it's just a control to ensure that gives a greater level of confidence that these are the people of Braintree we're hearing from, and that the comments are from individuals. And how many times can an individual comment on a specific topic? Because the way that I see it, that gives an opportunity to kind of put a thumb on the scale, if you will. It's just a balance that we're after. We certainly promote all kinds of public feedback, but I think that it has to be clear.
I agree. I agree that we need a name and a street, but I also am wanting to make sure that we're actually going to take into consideration the comments after going through all the extra work of trying to capture the public's feedback, that we actually, as a group, hear the public and take into account the public feedback.
So how about at our next meeting, I'll look into the technical side of what we can do on our platform, and we can talk about it again at the next meeting. We'll have to just remember to put that on the agenda.
Yep.
Great. All right, I want to talk more about the technical working sessions, but before I do that, are there any other comments or questions on the schedule?
If I may, Madam, through the
Please,
chair.
go ahead.
A question on the road show, as far as members presenting. So what we'll be showing, or what we'll be presenting as part of this roadshow, will be a canned presentation
Yeah.
of what comes out of the previous strategy sessions?
Yes, but let me clarify.
Okay.
So we'll give you a canned presentation that talks about the, some background of the process, how we got to where we are and what we're trying to do. And then we'll give you, well, what we've done in the past, if you agree to this, is we've given you modules that you can, if you're talking to one group, they may not care as much about something else. And so we'll let you pick and choose which module you want to present. You can present them all, I suppose, if a group is really interested in every single aspect. But if they're, particularly interested in zoning, or they're particularly interested in, public facilities, or whatever it is, we'll give you modules based on the core themes, and you can pick and choose which one you focus on with them.
Okay, so it's a recital of what we have agreed as a committee.
Yeah. And then
Excellent.
you're asking to get their feedback, additional feedback.
And we're there to capture that, to facilitate that
Exactly.
feedback. Thank you, that's clear as a bell.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, any other comments or questions before I dive into the technical working sessions? Liz?
Ms. Page?
Sorry.
At these roadshows, are the public comments going to be taken into account as well?
That's a good question. I was thinking these are more for the boards and committee members to get their particular feedback, but I think that if they'll all be done in open public meetings, because these are all public bodies, and if that board or commission wants to take public comment, I don't see why they can't, as long as there's room on their agenda to do that. But I would say it's probably the board or commission's call on if they're going to do that or not.
Through the chair.
Yes.
I would like to suggest that public comment be taken at all of these, because not every single board and commission is receptive to public input, and I think we want to stress in this master plan process that public input will be taken and will be reflected, because I think that has been a subject that is not really truly being reflected as much as it should be, in my opinion. So I think it's important that at every opportunity along the way, whether it be someone on zoning or someone in facilities, that it's important to hear what the public has to say about this project the whole way along.
Thank you. I wonder
you.
if perhaps Chair Wadlin, you'll probably be the initiator of an email to all the board and committee chairs to help with, the scheduling that Melissa and Connor helped to figure out. I wonder if in that email introduction requesting to get on the agenda, you could emphasize the importance of public comments and request that the board includes time for public comments. I know that we won't have control over what the boards decide to do, but you could request it, I think. Does that seem like a fair workaround?
It does. I have a question that I don't know the answer to. Maybe Melissa knows the answer to it. Is every board, I'm thinking that I can go and look at the meetings and transpose, like after we get the public comment, I can write them all on a sheet. But is every board on BCAM? Every board? No. No. Okay. So maybe we could try to...
Every board takes minutes, though. Every board is required to keep minutes. So anything that is
Okay.
discussed, whether it's members of this committee talking to the board or people in the audience making comments, that will all be reflected in
Okay.
the minutes for that
So that can-
particular
So that's
meeting.
easy to accomplish then?
Yep.
We can get all the feedback, and as long as we truly are going to take it into account, I think, great.
Yeah.
It's worth the
The
time and it's
only-
worth the effort.
The only board that is on, or at least that we, out of our office, honestly, I think the planning board might be the only one that's on BCAM.
Okay.
Conservation?
Nope,
ZBA?
nope. Board of Health, I don't believe is. Board of Health meets in Johnson. School committee might be. But we have a table with all those dates and stuff, and then we can help in any way with organizing. And some of the meetings have more people, and some, like zoning, they get their thing and they run out the door. So it depends on on the caseload and who would be there that evening.
Okay. Mr. Reynolds?
Thank you. I just wanted to emphasize that I do agree that public comment should be promoted in all of these public meetings. Absolutely, and as far as our roadshow, that should be the case. But I just want to caution, I would like to present a little different opinion about as far as the previous speaker about we have unresponsive boards. I don't agree with that at all. And I think that we need to keep our eye on the fact that these are boards that have information, that work with they have very specific tasks, they have more information and more of an understanding of these projects, that it doesn't get hijacked. That's all. I just want to make sure that it is careful, that we're listening for the expressed intent of this roadshow is to get feedback from those particular boards that have a very specific focus and charge in their duties and responsibilities of serving our town. And I just want to make sure that that is respected. Thank you.
Ms. Page?
Through the chair, I'm not saying that the boards are unresponsive. I'd like to clarify, I think there are some boards that are more responsive than others to public comment. There are some boards that are not very responsive to public comments. So I think it's important that we hear the public comments at all of the board meetings, because
I agree, and thank you.
it's not received the same way through the community. Thank you.
Okay. Moving along.
Okay, so I want to talk about these technical working sessions. That'll be the next kind of big thing that we're doing. And so we have them scheduled on March 15th and March 16th, and there's one for each of the core themes, and you have 5 core themes. 2 of them are happening simultaneously, and we're still working a little bit on the times because we weren't sure if BCAM could cover them if they were at the same time. And I don't know, Melissa, did you have an update on that? Okay. But right now, we're saying that they're the same exact time. At 4:30, we would do the Natural Resources, Conservation, and Sustainability group that Beverly and I would lead. And at 4:30, we'd also have one that Eric and or Chris from RKG would lead on public facilities. And those would be 2 hours. And if we need to stagger them, it's just because we want to make sure BCAM can capture the initial presentation for each. And if there's only one person filming and the equipment, we may need to stagger the time so that BCAM can go from one room to the next. They'll both be in this building, but I think in different rooms. So that's the only reason the time would change a little bit. We're trying to make sure that they can be recorded. And then on that same evening, we would all stay, and Beverly, myself, and then either Chris or Eric from RKG would lead a session on economic growth, the economic growth theme. That would be 7 to 9, and I think that would be in this room. Is that right?
I've got every room in town hall. I can't remember.
Okay, it's okay.
Which one is where?
Don't worry about the room right now. We'll figure that out. And then the very next day, we'll do another one at between 4:30 and 6 on traffic and transportation, and that one will be led by Juliet Walker from Kittleson. And then 7 to 9 that same day, but in the evening, we'll do the one on housing, and that will be led by me and Beverly. So the way these would be structured is we're going to ask you to come up with 16 participants who would be invited, and these would be people with either particular expertise in these areas or a specific perspective that you want to make sure is incorporated. It can include department managers, board and committee members. It can also include members of the public that don't serve on board or committee members. That it could include business people. It could include. There's no rule on who you're including, but the idea here is that they're technical working sessions. We're going to dive deep into strategies. We're going to talk zoning. We're going to talk funding mechanisms. We're going to talk, in some detail. So we want to make sure that, there'll be some level of education around the strategy ideas, but it's not all about educating on the ins and outs of these. We're expecting that the people participating will have some sense of what we're talking about, and they'll really be there to weigh in on pros and cons, best practices, what they think would work here in Braintree, if there's feasibility concerns, or if they have other ideas that could get at the vision and goals. And so we're asking you to think of 16 people for each of those working sessions, and then we would like also for 4 members of the Master Plan Steering Committee to come to each one. And I know that you don't have enough. I don't remember how many people you have, but I know you don't have enough.
11.
You have 11, yeah. So you're going to need to double up on some of them. And you're going to need to just think about which one will I be, either most interested in or most helpful at. And I would like 4 of you to come to each of these. So we don't have to decide this. We can talk about that in February. But you can just start thinking about that. And it's important that we have 4 of you because we're going to do breakout groups of the 16 people, and you're each going to facilitate a breakout group. That's why we need 4, because we're going to have 4 groups at each of these. And we're going to start out, and they'll all be open to the public. The public is welcome to attend and observe. And then, of course, they'll be recorded as well. And we're recording the parts that are not the breakout session, because that'll just be people talking in small groups, which is difficult to record on cable TV. But we will record the opening presentation. Each consultant team member who's leading these will have an opening presentation that talks about the 10 strategy ideas we'd like them to dig into. We'll give them materials ahead of time so that they'll have time to read through the materials, start to think. We typically create a little worksheet for them that they don't need to turn into us, but we like to have them start to weigh in their own minds some pros and cons, and are there any of the ideas on this list that are out of the question, no way they would want to see that, or anything that they love, or anything they have mixed. It's very similar to the 5-finger voting. We're going to have them do a little rating of the ideas, and then jot out some personal notes about pros and cons. So they're all going to have this homework, and then they come to the working session with their homework in hand. We don't collect it, but they use it to talk to their small groups and see if they can come to a small group consensus, if it's possible, around strategy ideas they'd like to keep in the mix, things that they want to throw out of the mix, and other ideas. And I want them to talk about other ideas that they had that maybe we didn't present to them. Maybe it's on our longer list, but might not have been one of the 10 that we gave them to talk about, and that's fine. And then they'll have an hour, so we'll have no more than a half an hour to present and answer questions up front. And then we have 1 hour where they'll be in their small groups, and then we'll have the last half hour, because it's a 2-hour session, the last half hour to do report outs from each of the groups. And we'd like the master plan committee members to be doing the report outs. So your job will be to help clarify anything. If there's a strategy they're struggling on that you happen to know about, you can help clarify. You can always pull one of us over, because the consultant team will be there wandering around, making sure if anybody has questions, we're there as a resource. But your job is not to monopolize the conversation. You're really there to listen, to take notes, and then you're going to want to present. And you're going to support them. If they feel stuck on something or don't understand, you'll either flag us over, explain. And then at the end, you'll each give, the 4 master plan steering committee members who are there will each give a presentation of what they, a summary of what they discussed. What are the top things that this group really liked? Did they like any of the strategy ideas? Did they feel any are, questionable, and they just have, they're not necessarily out of the running, but they just have a lot of questions on them or concerns? And then are there any that are just out, deal breakers, don't want to see them in, and then any new ideas? So that's what you're presenting. And that will be recorded. And so BCAM would record the opening presentation, and then they'd also record the presentations that you do at the end of your group discussion. So does that layout, the design of this and the purpose of it make sense? Does anybody have any questions or concerns or ideas?
I didn't know what you meant by the term report out, and who is this report out being given to?
Okay, fair enough. So a report out is you'll be taking notes, listening to your small group for the hour that they're talking about these strategies. And you're going to want to take notes so that you can present. That's all I mean by report out. I mean you're going to verbally present a summary of what they talked about. Not all the details, just high level. what things did they really like, what things did they really not like, what things do they have questions on, and any new ideas. And that'll be if you're comfortable with it. If anybody's not comfortable with this, you should let us know, and we'll figure out a workaround. Not everybody, feels like they excel at public speaking, and I understand that. We're also saying we're going to video you on cable TV. So you can tell me on the side if that's an issue. You can just email me or Melissa, but that's the idea of it.
Are you finished?
I just
David?
wasn't quite clear on who the reporting out is to,
Oh,
though.
it would be to everyone in the room at the moment, which could include an audience, because they're open public meetings. It would include the 16 people that you invited to participate and the 4 master plan committee members, whoever the consultant team is there. And then it would be recorded on BCAM, so it would be aired on TV.
I'm still not getting who this is being reported out to.
So, the presentation, it's not maybe I shouldn't have used the word report because it sounds like it's something in writing. It's just a verbal presentation of what your group talked about, and it'll be live in the room of whoever's there and then recorded.
Is it a recap in a sense?
It's a recap of what the small group talked about.
Okay.
What they
So
liked, what they didn't
It'll
like.
be the report to the whole group after the breakout session?
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
Uh,
Exactly.
Raina?
That get back to the whole committee? How
Yeah.
does that get back,
Yes. So
incorporated back in?
we prepare a report that basically summarizes, these are the strategies that, seem to have large agreement, these are the ones that have mixed feelings, and at your next meeting, which would be April 27th, we'll review the key takeaways, and we'll send you something in advance that summarizes what the 5,
Okay, yeah, it says that.
yeah. And then you all will talk about it there as well. Okay. Does that make sense now? Better sense?
It does,
Okay.
to me, anyway. To anyone else? Okay. I think we should keep going.
Okay, perfect. So let me move on to metrics. So now you can bring up that the worksheet. Oh, I just realized I didn't send you, I wanted to show them an example report. Can I email you one more thing? Okay. Give me a second. For some reason, the TV monitor wasn't connecting to my computer tonight, so Connor graciously offered to be my screen share tonight, but I actually forgot to send him one thing I wanted to share. So let me just ask, while I'm trying to get this emailed over to him so he can share it, let me just ask for a show of hands, and there's no shame here, I just want to know what I'm working with. Who was able to fill out the, sorry, hold on. Let me not speak for just 1 minute while I do this, or 10 seconds. Send. No subject. I'm not even giving a subject, Connor. Okay. All right, now I can speak. So raise your hands if you were able to fill out that worksheet. Great. Great, that's awesome. Okay. So, what we'd like to do is go through the worksheet and just talk. We don't have to make any decisions tonight. We're just talking. And I want to give you a little bit of a briefing first before we go into the details of what you said on your worksheet. I just want to give you a little bit of an overview of why we're even talking about this and what metrics are. And so if Connor can just bring up the, okay. But if you could bring up the worksheet first, I can start there, and then we'll switch over to the example. Perfect. So this is what you got, I don't remember when, I think it was early January. And we tried to explain what metrics are and give you some examples, so hopefully you found that helpful. But I'll just give you a sense from my own perspective verbally as well. So metrics are not something you have to do. There are many plans that don't have metrics. Many of our clients like to incorporate metrics so that they can measure progress over the next decade. Your town is going to be trying to implement this plan, and they need a way to know if they're successful or not. And what happens is that you give a bunch of strategies in the plan, And some of them you do, and you achieve it, and it's done, and you know you did it. Others you try to do, and you can't get approval, or you can't get funding, or you can't get political support, but you still have these goals that you want to achieve. And so you start to think of other ways to achieve those goals because some of the strategy ideas won't be successful. It's no fault of this process, it's just the way things are. And so you need to be ready to pivot. And this what I'm recommending every client I work with, I recommend you create an implementation committee, somebody that's tracking this. And you may see after year 5, well, we've tried to do this strategy and it's just not working, but we still believe in the vision, we still believe in the goal. Can we figure out another way? Maybe there's some other, zoning mechanism or some other tool or some other funding source. And so 5 years from now, you might think of a different way to get at that, but you still want to measure. It's helpful to be able to measure, well, now that we're doing this a different way, are we achieving our goals? And so metrics give you a way to, I guess, be more flexible about understanding how much you've achieved. Knowing that you won't be able to achieve, maybe you will, but likely you won't be able to achieve every strategy in there. You might still be achieving your goals. There might be other ways of doing that. So I'll give you some examples. Let's say you have a goal of reducing pedestrian fatalities in crosswalks or something like that. You can put a metric on that. You can say that X number of people have died in the past, whatever time frame you choose, 10 years in pedestrian crosswalks, and we want to reduce that to 0, or we want to reduce that by 10%, or whatever it is. That's your metric. And so maybe the strategy idea is to, I'm going to start making stuff up. Maybe you probably already do this, maybe you put cones in the middle of every crosswalk, or maybe you have crosswalk or cross guards at certain, there's all different ways to handle. Maybe you slow the speeds on the road. There are all different strategies to try to reduce pedestrian fatalities. And over time, you want to measure if it's doing anything, if you're effective, because just because you implement a strategy doesn't mean it's working. And so you want a way to measure that effect. And so that's what metrics do. If you pick a good metric and you have a good baseline understanding, and then you pick your metric can be either a percentage increase or a percentage reduction, or it can be, we want 0 of this. You can do metrics in different ways, but the idea is that you're actually measuring, and you establish a baseline and you can measure your progress. And then if something's not working, you can pivot and do something else, but you're still trying to achieve that goal. Does that make sense, the way I'm describing it?
I have a question. So after we go through the process and then the plan goes into effect, is there a body that would review, are we reaching the metrics? Are we reaching the plan that we've come up with? And like on an annual basis to see where the town needs to improve and where the town has failed miserably, like in one way, is there a body that would step in to ensure we follow the master plan?
We recommend that you create an implementation committee. Now, some communities don't follow that recommendation. There's nothing that requires you to do that, but we recommend that that's the body. Can be made up of people that represent the different boards and commissions. It can be made up of anyone you want, but the idea is that that master plan implementation committee would meet regularly, and I don't know that it needs to be every month, but it could be a few times a year, and reviews the progress. It looks at the metrics. It gets, report outs from let's say there's a planning board member on that master plan implementation committee. What progress has the planning board made on, making certain zoning recommendations or studies? Maybe studies will come out of this. And so that master plan implementation committee is overseeing. They don't have any authority. They can't really do anything, but they're overseeing and having some accountability. And then their membership is, of course, important because you would want members that are involved with the implementation, either because they sit on different boards or because they're department managers or perhaps other reasons.
Okay, thank you.
So does just the general idea of metrics, do people understand how I'm describing why some communities want to see them come out of their plan?
Mr. Reynolds.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wholeheartedly agree with the metrics. I think that, you know, it is a standard that we have to understand that we've spent this time, this money, this effort, coming up with a master plan, setting standards, setting a vision. And I understand there isn't anything necessarily from a legal standpoint like zoning bylaws that require us to follow them exactly, but it's important that we do. And I think an implementation committee that would check in on the progress and having those realistic metrics in place is going to make that a more black and white type of a performance measurement. So my understanding would be in getting to those agreed upon metrics is that we would have to agree upon what is a worthwhile area to measure, and then part B of that would be what is the actual standard that we would implement. From a realistic standpoint, I would think that we would want to be able to measure success in multiple measures. We hit a home run, you know, versus we've really done well and have marked progress, and we've reached the minimum, if you will. And that gives us a better kind of after-the-fact consensus of what success is and what's left to do.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And what we'll do, if you want to, is help you figure out what areas you want to measure. But what would need to be done after we're done with the master plan is figuring out, well, what is the baseline and what is the actual standard we're going to shoot for? That's beyond what we can do here in this master plan. But the implementation committee, working with, you know, department managers who know what baselines they have, can work to create those specific measurements. And I want to give you an example of what that can look like in your plan, like the level that we can get you to. And so did that email come through? It did, yep. Okay, good. So that Winchester plan, if you could just bring that up. Yeah, and just scroll down until you get to the first page on strategies. If you just scroll, it's going to be like, keep going, keep going, keep going. Yeah, keep going. Go, more, more. We're almost there. Next page. Okay, here. So if you can zoom in on at least one of those blue boxes on the bottom, so you'll see that the way this is laid out, we have, oh, actually, before you do that, stay at the top for just a second. I want to describe something. So the way we laid out this plan, we had a series of goals, and you can see there's a goal A4. Can you point to that? Can you blow that up a little bit more? Yeah. Yeah. That at the top is a kind of a shorthand for one of the goals. It was age within Winchester. They wanted people to be able to age with good quality life within the town. And then under that A4 are a few different strategies that they came up with for how to do it. And we have the strategy name and a very brief description of what that is. And then if you keep going down now to that blue box on the bottom, we have a metric, a couple ideas for metrics. One is percent of housing units that are accessible or provide supportive services, percent of senior population living within a quarter mile of the Jenks Center, which is their senior center, or a commercial area, or medical facilities, or a grocery store. And so we gave them ideas, and then the implementation committee, once the plan was done, they probably didn't choose all of these. We gave them a lot of ideas, but they chose some that they could get a good baseline for, and then they decided, well, what percentage? If we know that we have 5% of units, I'm just making numbers up right now. If we have 5% of units now that are accessible, maybe we want to shoot for 8% or something. You know, I don't know what. And so this is what we can, you know, tonight's conversation will help guide us on the areas you think we should focus on to make those kinds of suggestions. In phase 4, you'll see that we can integrate these into the plan layout. So that's what we're doing tonight, is just talking about, you know, what areas do you think, you might not know if there's a baseline tonight, and that's fine, but what areas do you think would be important to measure? Not all goals will be measurable. You may not, you know, need to think about, you won't need to think about a measurement for every single goal, but some goals you'll think are measurable and important enough to be measured. So does that make sense? Okay, any questions before we go into your worksheets? Okay, so let's go back over to the worksheet now, Connor. And I gave you on that first page a bunch of examples. I tried to give examples that were very different from each other, just so you had some ideas about the types of things you could do. And then I have, what I did is I laid out each of the bullets under the core theme. Those are your goals. We may end up rewording them a little bit after all is said and done, but they're essentially your goals. And so, you know, under the first core theme, sustainability, natural, historic, and cultural resources, you actually have a lot of goals. You may not end up with so many at the end of the day, but right now you have 13 goals. And so I'll just start with each core theme and just ask if anybody thought of ideas for any metrics. And we don't have to agree on anything. You're just telling me, giving a little report out on what you think for each of those core themes. It seems like Joe may want to talk. Do you? Oh, okay.
Intently.
Okay, all right, good.
So do we want to just to keep the way we were going, if we start, you don't have to say anything, but if you have something to add to core theme 1, then why don't we go around the horn? And if
That sounds
if
good.
you don't, just say pass.
And we don't need to go through every 13 goal. Just say if you had any ideas at all, you can say any of them under that core theme. So then Peter would start.
Peter, not to put you on the spot.
So on core theme 1, number 1, I'd written down, one of the metrics could be to measure the number of, I put down acres, but maybe square feet of land dedicated to open space uses. And then relative to enhancing water resources, I would think the state measures water quality in bodies of
Yes.
water, and we could compare that now to future.
Great, so acres or square foot of open space and water quality, some metric around water quality. Yeah, great. Thanks, Peter.
David?
I had written down at number 1, periodic reports of land acquisition, so similar to what we just heard. And I also wrote down the idea of reinstituting a dredging program for the current reservoirs, exploring use of the Farm River and MWRA for increased water supply, actively pursue conservation easements in exchange for reduced assessments or lower tax rate for affected land with respect to number 2.
And some of these are hard, you know, to find a
Yeah.
metric, so you don't need to think of one for everything.
Yeah. Well, I filled in answers for all of them, but they may not actually be answers that you would think are metrics.
Well, some of them, I think I'm hearing some strategy ideas, which we'll also take. But yeah, if you have any that were, you know, measurable.
Well, one of them would be for measuring the number of trees that are planted throughout the town. I know Bell used to have a tree planting program. I don't know if it's still in effect or not, but that seems, if it is in effect, something that could be measured. And if it's no longer in effect, maybe we want to just put it back into effect. Also, further down, keep track of the number of drainage pools that are required for development purposes. Keep track of the number of rain barrels that the town issues to people who take advantage of them. Keep track of the green technology into existing buildings and all new construction that takes place in the town. This may not be a metric, but it talks about sound barriers with respect to number 9 along highways and railways. And incorporating light design into new building projects. Another one would be to try to incentivize particular types of businesses into particular locations, like for instance, small grocery stores in the town squares. It's going to be awfully difficult to do that because the town squares have inadequate parking, but trying to get businesses to be steered in different directions would be part of what I was talking about. Another is just updating the zoning bylaw. Another is to keep track of student projects throughout the town, whether it's art projects or some other projects. And another is to update the town website on a regular basis.
Okay, thank you.
That's what I
Thank
came
you.
up with.
And so I think what would be great is if nobody minds, we would love to collect your worksheets if you do have a lot of ideas that you wrote on them at the end. Or you can send it to us later if you want. Okay, great.
Can I ask a question before we continue? Do you want to, I have a lot of ideas and a lot of comments. I don't know that you want me to go through
I don't think we need to go through every single
one of
one.
them?
I think that you can hit the highlights and focus on things that are really measurable. Yeah.
Melissa?
Madam Chair, when everyone hands them in tonight, what we can do is we can scan them and then distribute them to everybody, so everybody can see, if you didn't mention it this evening, the other members can see all the other things that you had as well.
That makes sense.
That's a great idea. Did you want to
Erin?
move to Erin?
Thank you. I'll just kind of give a highlight of some ideas, trying to keep them metric related. With along the lines, just to add in addition to the first protect, restore, and enhance water resources, that first idea there, I was curious if there was any way in which to track quality of habitat or condition of habitat. I think sometimes just having preserved space but not keeping up with it isn't as good as having like quality spaces. So it would be curious if there was a metric to do that, to assess quality of preserved spaces and just see if you can make that, you know, maybe enhance buffer zones and do more around some of the natural resources. So I'd like to see if that's possible, and just another idea there. With regards to preserving and protecting residential neighborhoods and the idea of buffering areas, just maybe an idea of like starting, and I don't know how you would do this, but defining neighborhood zones and targeting buffer areas, just to try to maybe say like this neighborhood had, you know, more tree loss than this neighborhood, or this neighborhood has, just to try to, I think, monitor that no one neighborhood is, you know, disproportionately losing tree canopy than other neighborhoods, as a metric to measure that. An idea on sustainability, I wonder if we could have tracking the percentages of new buildings that exceed energy code, standard energy code. So if there's projects that are, you know, going after like incredibly, passive house, which is incredibly energy efficient. You know, Boston has the zero carbon emissions. Like, not that we would go that far, but tracking the number of developments that do exceed the energy code, and then maybe, you know, being able to evaluate that just as a metric of how sustainable our planned developments are. And with regards to the locally grown food, maybe it's possible to track the number of locations that people have access to locally grown food throughout the community, whether that's a grocery store, or a farmer's market, or a community garden. And enhancing pride and attractiveness, an idea would be just maybe keeping track of the number of public art installations, and maybe a map or some way to share what the public art that's around town and available is, and see if we can get, you know, more and more on that map. So just some highlights of some ideas. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Reynolds?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've heard some great ideas here. I'm going to make sure that I move on with the ones we haven't touched on. So from the water perspective, we could measure what we have in cubic feet presently. We do have that measurement of what we have in cubic feet presently from a reservoir holding perspective. With that, we can set that metric of creating more cubic holding space for our reservoir. So I think that's a pretty cut and dry metric that we could implement there, because there are opportunities in our community right now to be able to expand our reservoir holding capabilities. There was also a previous speaker spoke about water sources. We know what water sources we have presently that fill our reservoirs, and there are opportunities. So we could measure that. These are the sources we have of quality water to fill our reservoirs. There's another pretty cut and dry metric. From a preserve and protect residential neighborhoods, I think there were some great ideas that Member Joyce had talked about there, and I think that there's that stake in the ground to take stock of what are those buffer zone square footages now? How are they, how effective are they if you were able to create a scale? How effective they are between not like uses, more or less those buffer zones are for uses that are different than a residential neighborhood. And we could take stock, a measurement of what kind of passive green space that we have, giving us a target of how we can increase those. The, let's see. From the supportive implementation of successful sustainability to combat climate change, reduce of urban heat islands, we can measure the total impervious surfaces that we have in the community presently. Would have to categorize those because you have streets, you have driveways, et cetera. But what that would do, it would, and when you categorize those, it would give us that opportunity to take a look at and see what are the ones that we can change and alter. What can we modify that so that they are less impervious, or remove the impervious nature of those surfaces altogether. There, I think, is a very measurable metric for us. The tree canopy, that was a very interesting one. I don't have the expertise. I can make some assumptions, and I'm not a subject matter expert, but I think if we were able to talk to someone who, there probably are measurements already of a density of a wooded area, the type of canopy, the type of trees. I live in a neighborhood that's got very old and tall oak trees, very robust, but I have noticed a lot of them through just the nature of these trees' lives that they rot. And a lot of them have had to come down for safety reasons. So if we're able to kind of categorize and measure from that sense, I need a lot more information to really give you something more specific. But we can increase the net green spaces that we have because we know what we have in acreage and square footage for our green spaces and our open spaces. The facilities for reducing energy use and converting to renewable energy sources. The percentage of local power generation is derived, we can measure what's derived from renewable sources. What is derived from more of the traditional energy sources that we're trying to move away from. Where we have that, we have our own local electric supplier, we can capture that data. It is there already for us to be able to leverage and take advantage of. The impact of noise and light pollution on residents and neighborhoods. I did hear a few good ideas. I don't know a whole lot about that technology, what they offer, but I do know that for the town of Braintree, for example, a metric was they replaced all of our streetlights, public streetlights, with LED lighting. So that was they were able to do that. They measured it and provided that progress as it went along. So there's something that has been already done. We can leverage those particular efforts as well. Some of the other ones, that is it for now. That's all.
Thank you. Okay, so to the point of water resources, I think we need to have the Conservation Commission assess each for the rank on the U.S. Forest Service 6-step watershed condition framework and see where we're at, and then look to progress, right? So that's a way to actually have something measurable, right? Total acres, we need to figure out what the total acres protected by open space that's owned by the town. And I think that we need to increase our buffer requirements between non-like, what's the right word? Uses, thank you. I think also we need to look at reducing the heat islands and the heat island effects, and look at, there are certain things that you can do to reduce that. Some of that's plant more trees. I think that if a tree is taken down by any development, I think a tree has to be planted, and to reduce these urban heat islands. And I also think we need to require builders to build with green materials. I think we have to put our money where our mouth is here if we're going to talk about the environment, and everybody does, but nobody enforces it, so that would be great. I also think we need to assess the total acres of impervious surfaces and pervious surfaces as well. We said the same thing. And then the total energy use per household. I think we get that now on our Bell's bill, like there's a new, I think we can see that with water if you really call and ask. So, you know, maybe there's incentives to reduce as a town or a household, we could provide some incentives there. And I think that's it. I have a few other things, but I'm going to submit them. Raina?
So I'll add a few things. One is, I think, kind of simple. I think we could look at how much money is spent on some things that we had talked about, better signage and information about our parks and open spaces and natural areas. I thought we could look at specific opportunities within neighborhoods to increase open space. I know we had sort of talked about it a little bit, but we could put together a plan and we could actually identify those. So I guess the metric would be to create a plan that identifies open space in every neighborhood, that potential new space. And then, you know, I talked about the information. Let's see. I'd also look at money spent or identified specifically to enhance, you know, our parks that we have and to, you know, keep them in good shape and improve them. I think that's all I'll add for now.
Thank you. Liz Page?
To add some different things rather than repeating some of the same, because I think a lot of us have similar ideas, I think there should be some ways to measure the impact of noise and light pollution on neighborhoods, and that there should be standards. I'm pretty sure there are some now on noise levels, and there should be some from light levels as well, and I think those need to be applied to new developments, especially ones that would border residential neighborhoods. I think that another thing we're really failing to capture in this plan is traffic. I think the town has had a huge traffic problem for years. Everybody talks about it every election. Nothing is ever done. So I think we should take a look at our current levels of service and our average peak traffic levels, and they should be examined before and after developments occur to see if the reports that we're getting are actually accurate. And then additional modifications to improve anything that was not accurately reported prior to this development. In terms of the affordable housing, it should be pretty easy to maintain a standard of what is going on in our affordable housing.
I think you jumped. We're going to let you wait till the next one.
Yeah, just core
Oh,
theme
all
one
right,
right now.
I'm sorry, I thought we were going through all of them.
We're just doing one.
Okay,
We're
so
on
sorry.
one. We're still on one.
We're right there.
I'm just moving through the whole thing here, I didn't want to repeat everything over again.
Justine.
Okay, sorry about that.
Thank you. I agree with Aaron in terms of the quality versus quantity of open space. So if we could measure how our open space being used in variety of subjects, such as walking trail, fishing pond, sport space, or concert or that type. If we could able to track what are the usage and the diversity of the usage, not just the quantity, for the open space perspective, and and we need to measure what's the percentage of lands being lost for development. I know we talk about tree canopy, but talking about lands perspective that we need to measure. That also to make sure that we have land to cover the heat island effect from the suburban perspective, because we're in the intersection of all highways. Would also back to Liz's question, Liz's suggestion, where we need to have a way to measure air quality, sound quality, and line quality. I'm sure there is an index, industry standard index out there that we want to make sure that we compare where we are today and where we are next year in terms of those three type of indexing from the compared to the industry in terms of our town's characteristics. And also, one last thing I want to add is the walkability of the towns. Because we talk about the town, we want to have the village feeling. We want to build bridges between the east and the south. And what are our metrics on the walkability of each area of the town? How can we connect them?
Great. Chair Wadlin, for core theme 2, did you want to go the opposite direction? It's up to you.
I don't know, maybe we'll just keep going around.
That's fine.
Is that all right with you, Peter? I don't want to put you on the spot.
Okay.
Is that okay? Okay.
So again, you can just hit the highlights, and I don't want to keep you here till midnight tonight, so why don't I put a new rule in place? Why don't you just say up to 3 ideas that are different from the last person, the last ones, okay?
Very good.
Go ahead.
It's nice to be first. I struggled on this one because I think there's a lot of great objective metrics that we can measure, such as tax revenues from different sources of commercial versus residential sources. We can measure whether there's strategic community growth plans in place for those sections of the town. And then I think the existing conditions report had a lot of measurements on transportation usage and pedestrian safety, injury type numbers. But I would be very curious to see if anyone came up with metrics for 5 and 6, because I thought those were very subjective and might be hard to measure.
Yeah, great. Thank you for sticking to 3.
David?
I had a very difficult time just dealing with the issue of metrics in general, and I think I did more ideas than metrics throughout. So rather than just saying the ideas.
You can just give me the ideas, because we'll incorporate that when we start to think about the strategies. You can just give me the worksheet later, rather than presenting them.
It's probably better that I do that.
I think so. Thanks.
Just for a thought, like, I mean, maybe that's a better route to go I mean, everyone can do the couple, but maybe that is the better route to go, to compile them and then kind of put them all up and show them to the public as like a one list. I think, probably. Yeah, maybe just a highlight, everyone could highlight 1 or 2 from, because we could.
All right, we just went down from 3 to,
like
let's
20.
do 2. Let's do 2.
I've got like 20, I don't know, I feel like.
Adjourned.
I've got 5 and 6, Peter, I don't know, all right, we'll go with Erin, but maybe I feel like is this meeting a little painful for the public?
If I may, through the I think it's nice for people to hear other people's too, to.
I know,
to
I
make
agree.
kind of connections and.
Okay.
Expand upon that, maybe an idea, somebody has a metric for an idea and vice versa.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I like it because I had such a hard time trying to come up with metrics, but now that I'm hearing everyone's ideas and it's helping me think of it more, and I'm changing it into metrics as we're talking, so it's helpful for me, but I'll just stick to 2 or 3. For core theme 2, I thought we could track, with new projects, we could track whether or not they're 100% redevelopment, 50% redevelopment, or just what percentage of redevelopment versus new development, just to try to see if we can target redevelopment as a majority of what we're doing. For number 5, I thought we could track maybe percent of vacant tenant spaces in the squares, just to try to monitor what's there, and then kind of as a tag onto that, if there was some way to track variability in the businesses, maybe a pie chart that kind of shows, so if you see one area is kind of heavy on restaurants and hair salons, and you're trying to get maybe an independent bookstore or some other alternative use, maybe you try to target vacant spaces in that area. So, thanks.
Councilor Reynolds.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Number 1 under core theme 2 is we mark the revenue generation of existing uses and structures in the areas in question for what kind of strategic uses from an economic growth standpoint. The number 2 was what percentage of the current tax revenue was made up of non-residential? Of course, that would have to be in comparison to the actual operating budget needs. So that one has to be fleshed out a bit more. We can't spend what we don't have, and it has to be balanced versus what are the things that we want, and what are the level of taxes as individual homeowners are we willing to pay for what we want. So I think breaking that out and tracking that gives us that sense. Number 3, or actually number 4, and this will be my last one, so capitalize on the regional boom of professional, scientific, technological, is to measure what do we have that attracts these businesses and their needs from a competitive standpoint. There's a lot of information out there right now that shows region by region who is doing well and who is not doing so well. And what is industry looking for, in particular when you talk about science and hospitals and universities, manufacturing, etc. Does our area possess those needs? And we can list those as a accepted practice in the business environment for what it is they're looking for. Measure what we have against those needs and what we're willing to go to. Thank you.
I would take his point a step further and measure the tax revenue from the group of types of businesses that we're trying to attract. And my strategy would be to hire somebody to recruit and kind of figure that out, a business person to recruit, figure out what the needs and wants are for the type of businesses we're trying to attract. Number 1, I'd say, develop strategic community-supported economic growth. So, the number of targeted areas and the number of community-supported plans. I would also say, as far as number 5 goes, to beautify and activate Braintree Square, the number of public events in each area and the total participation for each area, and the number of active businesses by type for each area, sort of on Erin's. I also had the number of trees, because I think beautification needs to happen in those squares. And I think that's 3. So I'm going to turn it over to Raina.
Thank you. I'm just going to mention, too, I also had a hard time with metrics as opposed to ideas. So I'll just mention 2 things. One is I would really like to identify all the properties that are underdeveloped or blighted or, vacant and sitting. Blighted, I know, has a real meaning, but I would like a real map, and I would like a plan that goes with it to address them with a budget as to you know, what we could do, and what it would cost to do it. Maybe it's just enforcement, but maybe there are other things. And sort of related to your idea of hiring an economic development officer, I would like a real economic development plan that really gets into revenue goals, you know, really drills down into, you know, what we would do, what it would cost, what we would get out of it, target industries. So it's not really a metric, but I think we need a real plan to develop good metrics, you know, and a budget to do implementation of any real activity, an action plan. That's all I'm going to mention.
Can I ask clarity on that? Because we do talk about a budget, and we could say there's a budget for this, so there's not a budget for that all day long, because we're not the budget people. We don't have control over the budget. But you had once said we can't really talk about that, like that's because that's not our area, like to figure out if there's budget or not in the vision statement. Is that hold true for the metrics?
So where we'll really want to talk about it is in the strategies. And before we put together an implementation plan, we need to understand if the town may have budget or if we need to look for outside sources. So it's not so much about the metrics, although I think I understand what Raina's saying, like you're trying to have a plan that focuses on economic development with a budget for, or repurposing buildings. But you're asking, I think, a slightly different question, and that's when can we talk about budget, right?
Well, and I don't know that it's this group talking about budget. Like, we might all change the Braintree budget in a different way, right? Like, so I don't think that's our deal, but.
Well, part of it is just listening to, like, when we go to the department managers, they'll have a really good sense of budget and what could be feasible and what sources.
That makes more sense.
Yeah.
All right, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Liz.
Of course, I was going to just run through the whole plan and like that, would all be done by now, but I do agree with most of the things that have been said so far. I do think it's kind of difficult to get real metrics on this, or I have a hard time grasping that, but I think, for example, like on number 3, the repurpose of key blighted and underutilized properties, I mean, we must have some kind of a number of those properties, and then to be able to compare that number with plans that have been approved and have been community approved. That's a tough metric, but I think it would be an important one if we could come up with a way to do it. And then in the beautify and activate Braintree Square and the other squares, I think we could take a count of the number of the trees in the landing, or in each area, and then maybe get some kind of a count of the possibly potted plants in each area, and maybe, you know, have certain times per year that they're rejuvenated or updated, and that might be one way to help keep it going. And I guess that's it. I don't have anything else that's different. Thank you.
Justine.
Thank you. As expertise that always have to measure customer service, return on investment, one thing that I would like to see is how do we measure cost versus revenue, return of investment on a particular development? If you're looking at the undeveloped area or new development coming, how do we measure the town's return investment versus the developer's profit perspective, and also adding different variants into these measurements? So example will be the residents' impact will take account to 10% of this return on investment metric perspective. So if we could, every development that we say, let's redevelop this area, we need to take in account of what are the costs versus revenue the town will get, based on a percentage of different variants. And the second one is, how do we track the trend of the business? So example, Town Square, we have more if you're looking along the Washington Street, we have more hair salon and nail salon versus restaurants and other small supermarket, mom and pop, medicines perspective. How do we calculate the trend of the business our town versus standard in the industry perspective, in the village type of feeling. And the last one I have is percentage of the percentage that we spend on promoting our business versus promoting new business versus how do we keep the existing business to survive, that perspective. What are the percentage that we plan to spend on attracting new business versus maintaining existing business?
Okay, thank you.
Core theme
So
3.
now core theme 3.
Yeah.
Peter?
I think core theme 3 is full of a lot of objective things that can be measured as far as traffic count numbers and fatalities and injuries. But I was also thinking that the community needs to be polled because some of those objective numbers don't reflect, you know, when a certain street is being used as a cut through a neighborhood. And so polling individuals and finding out where the problem areas would be, I think would be a metric that should be measured and monitored.
David?
Number one, I think it might make sense to keep track of how we fund the police department with respect to traffic conditions, parking situations, calming measures. Based on what I understand, the police are the only people who have the power to enforce traffic and parking violations, yet we don't fund department to actually do that enforcement. So I think that's something that we easily do is keep track of what we put into the police budget for those purposes. Same thing with respect to number 2. Keep track of the budgets that we use for maintenance and repair and replacement of you know, sidewalks and road conditions. I mean, I think we do that already, but it might be that we could change the way we go about doing it. In number 3, I kind of set forth an idea rather than a metric. And I pretty much did that for numbers 3, 4, and 5, but with respect to 5, I was thinking that it might be an example of where we can do something that another member talked about at a previous meeting about the last mile transportation. And you know, right now we have, as far as I know, no connection to the the Quincy Adams T station, but it's only it's practically within walking distance of the South Shore Plaza. That might help with the traffic around the plaza to have a last mile shuttle program from the Quincy Adams T station to the South Shore Plaza. And there may be an opportunity in the near future to try to get that to be some type of a public-private partnership. So anyway, that's what I was talking about as far as that goes.
All right, a couple ideas on core theme 3. With regards to number 2, which talks about unified designs of roads and sidewalks, I was thinking we could create a standard street section, say concrete sidewalks, granite curb, certain width of pavement, and then, you know, maybe that's like best case, maybe on side streets it's a different type of curbing, maybe it's asphalt curbing, asphalt sidewalk, but then we could create maybe the levels of desired roadway and then track what percentage of our roadways need it. So we can pick away at trying to get more unified roads that way. With regards to number 3, 2 ideas for metrics there is just to track the percentage of public bike storage facilities. So if you are able to use your bike around town, where can you store it? And then I think we can also target new developments and how they might provide that to try to increase that infrastructure. And I don't know if our town has had to do kind of a complete crosswalk compliance assessment throughout town, but I know there are some communities around us that have done that. So I would just say maybe tracking the percentage of our crosswalks that are fully compliant. If that's not already been required, it may be required. So a metric to track crosswalk compliance and pedestrian ramps at the crosswalk compliance. So a couple metrics on core theme 3.
Councilor Reynolds.
Thank you. Let's see. I want to make sure that we're still on traffic. All right, thank you. So number 1, speeding incidents, improve the safety of local roads and traffic calming measures. So like everything else, I believe what we need to do, the first step is always put a stake in the ground. What's the assess the current situation? And what we do is we look at the number of incidents, speeding incidents, the number of police stops, the number of accidents, et cetera, along these roads of concern and intersections of concern. Then we implement what kind of changes we think we need to put in at that point with a very specific, here is where we start, this is our first goal in year 1, this is how much money we have to spend, and this is our goal to have for available funds in the following year. So there are 2 different metrics, I think, in that particular aspect of this issue of saying, how do we stop, break down the numbers? 1, what's the correlation between what we're spending? The amount of money spent on the traffic calming measures is another thing. And those traffic calming measures and the amount of money that's actually spent on traffic enforcement. Number 5 was expanding the variety of transportation options for local and regional. I think, again, with that stake in the ground approach, you assess what the number of current options we have for commuting, whether it's rail, train. When I say that, I mean commuter rail, MBTA, ride sharing, and shuttle buses, and also just bus routes. And what's their service level, and you measure what those levels of service reliability are presently, and the number of trips that are available daily, presently. There's your start point. We want to, again, after an assessment, understand what we need to do to increase. Do we need to implement changes and gaps? I know, as Dave had mentioned earlier, we had talked previously about the first mile, last mile option availabilities. I think you can make a measurement as well towards the number of traffic and single trips that you're seeing on our roads once you have a broader public transportation and a more efficient end-to-end system in place. And then lastly, the number of downtown, could we add shuttles services for our internal community from a senior standpoint, or even just between squares and commerce centers? Thank you.
Thank you. I would like us to review the total count of school route sidewalks plowed and not plowed after a snow event, and also the squares. I think both are a big thorn in parents, and I have received a letter from someone who's been going to the meetings about the landing, how it's not plowed to get onto the crosswalk, so ever, she's saying. So, very concerning there. So I think we should measure what's actually being done and try to make an improvement there. I also had to measure the traffic accidents, but the ones involving pedestrians, the ones involving bikes, and also the accidents, regular car accidents. I also think we need to have a metric to reduce cut-through traffic. We can't keep talking about traffic and do nothing about it. I don't know what the answer is, but it could be that we have somebody at the police department that it keeps pulling people over and then they stop cutting through town. A lot of traffic calming in the neighborhoods to stop those routes from happening. I yell at my husband every time he goes down Tremont. I'm like, go Washington Street. So I think that somehow, though we have to work on some metrics with traffic. I just don't know. Maybe that department would have a better idea on metrics than I do. Raina.
I don't have any additional metrics. Mine were covered.
Liz?
As I said, the issue of traffic is one that has plagued our neighborhood for many years, and so it's very near and dear to my heart. And I think that we probably need to start by doing a lot of measuring and counting, traffic counting in the neighborhoods. And after we determine those numbers, it would probably be smart to look at different traffic calming measures, which have happened occasionally through neighborhoods, but I think it needs to be almost more of a comprehensive thing for an entire neighborhood, not just a random street here and there. We may have to look at maybe do not enter during certain times. But I think in addition to correcting the cut-through traffic in our residential neighborhoods, we need to make the Washington Street corridor more efficient and to be something that the traffic is encouraged to stay on the main roads and not be going through the residential neighborhoods. And so the two things would probably have to be connected by, measuring the traffic counts and timing the lights and the levels of service at the different intersections to see what those levels are, and start doing something to really make a big difference, because right now, just what we're doing here and there just isn't working on a regular basis. Thank you.
Justine?
Okay. Thanks for all the great ideas. One thing I have is our town need to come with a standardized measurement of how a new development impact our traffics, not just because the developer say so. So it's looking for some metrics on how do we measure or standardize the way the town calculate these traffic for any new development. I would say, like, example, high-density development is not based on where they're located, but all those residents need to access to town, so we need to have a measurement on standardize those measurements. Second one is I really want to say 100% by racks for all Braintree public building, because as a previous PTO for Flaherty School, I could not believe the school had to come out with their own money, and I have to donate all the bike locks for a bike rack for a public school. So I'm looking for a concrete number of 100% bike rack for all public buildings within certain year. Like example, within next 2 years, that type of metrics in something that we can be done for the publics. And the third one is define walkability based on the areas that we have. Example, what percentage of, what are the walkability percentage for town square? What are the percentage of walkability for each public school? Because if you're looking at middle school, high school, within a mile, we don't have bus service unless you pay. I don't even know if you can get there with a fee. But that type of public building for our school, kids don't have transportation within a mile. What are their walkability measurement there? That's what I have.
Okay, core theme 4. Peter?
Core theme 4, I think we've heard a lot about protecting the residential neighborhoods, and so I think one metric to measure would be whether in fact there are zoning enhancements, changes, amendments that actually carry that out after this plan is approved. I'll go with one.
David, sorry.
Okay. 2 of the 4 I put in as a metric, which may not be an accurate thing, but update the zoning bylaw for numbers 2 and 3. and consider eminent domain under some circumstances for numbers, for number 3. Probably number 4 too. And measure the impact with respect to number 1 of any development that affects residential neighborhoods by, for instance, in the town squares. What impact does it have on the neighborhoods when there's no parking and the people park in the residential neighborhoods? Or there's no area for loading and unloading, so they do the loading and unloading in the residential neighborhoods. Or there's no place to do drop-off and pickup, so they do the drop-off and pickup in the residential neighborhoods. Or people who are just, they can't find a place to park for any length of time, so they just idle while somebody else goes in to pick something up in a commercial area, but they're idling in a residential area. And the measurement of actual parking spaces that serve the business areas shouldn't be all that difficult. And measure the number of handicap parking spaces that serve each of the town squares. I think it'll be easy for the landing. I think the number is 0. But those are things that can be done with respect to metrics on these issues. With respect to keep track of the number of dilapidated properties on both public and private property. Let's face it, some of our public buildings can actually fit within a dilapidated description, and see what we can do to convert some of these properties into housing that would allow us to get to the goal.
I think it's Erin's turn.
Yeah. All right. A couple ideas for metrics on core theme 4. For neighborhood protection and housing choice, I think one of the big things that will, help us be successful on working through a lot of these is just a really significant outreach and awareness for all the stakeholders in developments or redevelopments. So I know as part of most projects that go before the planning board have, as chair of the planning board, there's public comments. I think sometimes as part of the public comment in the planning board, there's a lot, I think it benefits more to have community meetings outside of just the public comment forum. Some communities require of new developments that the district councilors hold a community meeting, and that's part of the requirement to come before the planning board. So you have to hold a community meeting, and I think just it's usually in the community with the stakeholders, and it generally is a little bit easier to converse outside of the technical format of the planning board. So I would love to see that our community have something like that, and maybe it starts out with a certain threshold of development, but I think working our way up to 100% of developments have to have a community meeting so that we can really be aware and try to get ahead of neighborhood concerns and how those can be addressed and people can feel more heard, because I think right now those processes aren't working as well for us. Another metric would be for when we look at targeting age-restricted housing, veterans housing, service-enriched housing, even the smaller single-family starter homes, I think identifying what this housing would want to be near. For example, I think you had shared senior housing being near the senior center, maybe a healthcare facility, a grocery facility. So trying to maybe target the percentage of this housing that's nearest to the services that it would be interested in, if there's a way to do that. And I think with regards to affordable housing stock, I think we should track not only the affordable housing stock that's related to the subsidized housing inventory, but I think tracking also just a workforce housing stock, which is, you know, slightly above the affordable housing stock. So affordable's typically that 80% AMI, but workforce housing I think is somewhere between like 140 and 100 of AMI. So if there's a way to track the percentage of workforce housing, because I think just tying into what another speaker had said about what, you know, when we're trying to attract new businesses and what are those businesses looking for, the number one thing they're looking for is workers. So that's what they're looking for. So I think we have to just track as much data as we can about the housing that we have available, especially if we're really looking at trying to rely on existing housing stock and not create new housing stock. So thank you.
Councilor Reynolds.
Thank you. Number 2 on the core theme of neighborhood protection and housing choice, carefully consider a diverse range of well-designed and compatibly scaled housings. I would say again, how many units are available in each of these categories presently? We get a start point. This forum here, the amount of diverse housing choices that we have that reflect upon people at different stages of their lives, sizes of families, et cetera, I think are important demographics that should be utilized from a scale standpoint, if at all possible. And then with a known starting number of specific types of housing types, we can then measure against that success what it is that we want to do by noting the number of new units versus I can't even read my own writing, versus the the targeted increases by year. So how are we doing against what we want to do? What did we create by type, and what did we actually do? Number 3 was to carefully consider options for housing that are accessible to mass transit. I think this is a really important one that has a kind of a multiplying effect across benefits for our community. How many households presently are in walking access to a public transportation station? And I mean by a walking distance, whether it's a bus, is there a system of transfers, for example? I catch a bus or a shuttle that's going to take me to the nearest commuter rail station or to the Red Line. Or can I just walk across the street? Things of that nature. I think we can measure how many we actually have right now, what's available. And then with that, we can measure what it is we need to put in place that will have, again, a multiplying effect on traffic and the number of cars on our road. Thank you.
So I too had to measure all the, single-family homes greater than 1,500 feet, single-family homes less, townwide multifamily homes, senior housing, 65 and over, age restricted, and so forth and so on, and you can read it. And then I thought, instead of saying where are we weak, I thought we'd say, what does the community want? What does the community want to grow in? And I think from the survey we saw veterans housing, age restricted housing, and smaller single-family homes. So we look at those areas and look for opportunities to grow where the people want to grow, not necessarily our individual thoughts. So I thought we should look at that. I should also loved Peter's suggestion about zoning enhancements to carry out bigger buffers for neighborhoods and increase buffer requirements. And open space cannot be shared between 2 different uses. Raina.
Well, I had similar kind of things with housing. I was thinking it would be helpful to have, a way to look at what our housing stock is, all kinds, and look at our sort of demographic and conditions, who lives here, and see what the mismatch is. And taking into consideration actually some other things about business needs and, you know, what people's concerns are, but, you know, what is the indication of how much additional, you know, senior housing or whatever kind of housing based on who we are right now? So I guess I don't know how to explain that, but it's sort of, what do we have and, you know, what's missing? And I think also, you know, there's an economic factor in there of affordability. So I'd like to see a study that looks very specifically at that, just to see, like, we say we want this kind of housing or that, but how much? Who's it serving? You know, it would be good to get a handle on that. And the other things I had were touched on. I mean, I think zoning will come up a lot. It could serve a lot of different functions, but that's not really a metric. That's kind of a tool, I hope. That's it for me.
So I think a lot of important points have been raised, and I do agree that this seems to be one area that we have a lot of ability to measure different standards for what type of housing we have. And I think it's very important that, once again, we listen to the residents in the survey and what they told us they want. And, you know, I think when everybody talks about adding housing and we've got to have this and we've got to have that, and nobody is ever giving us a big picture of how many units they're talking about. So I think that's a concern, because it takes a toll on a town after a certain amount of time. I do think that we have to stay right on top of our affordable housing stock to reach our 10% goal. And I think in addition to that, we need to make sure that all of our open space and non-buildable land, which also helps us come to our safe harbor number, is important, that all of that is registered properly so that it is able to be counted. And if it's not defined correctly, then we need to get to the point where it is defined correctly. I know we're not really supposed to touch too much on zoning bylaws, but I think it's very important that developers are required to maintain zoning bylaws and not to get them waived. And I think that our zoning bylaws are there for a reason, and they need to be there to protect the residents. And I think these are all things that we can move forward and measure pretty accurately. Thank you.
For me, I know everybody talk about different housing stock and measurement. What I was looking for is there a matrix where we can track the affordability costs within town of Braintree and our neighborhoods, towns, and with the different measurement in terms of quality of life versus how the units being cost and the unit of affordability. What I'm trying to say is you could build a high density in Braintree. Would it be the same cost as our neighborhood? Is it on average our neighborhood? If that happened, what type of service Braintree is provide better than the other town? That's a metric to measure those type of housing, instead of everybody coming to say our town don't have affordability. Is the metrics of how do we measure affordability? Is it based on income or based on residents, quality of life, the school quality of life, or our location? So basically it's a metrics of affordability in Braintree.
Thank you.
So, Chair Wadlin, I'm seeing that it's almost 9.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, do we want to ask people to just give us one idea for the last one?
Perfect.
Okay.
Unless anyone wants one. I think one's perfect. Peter, for you again. I'm sorry, we're starting with you.
Might not be my best idea, but on sub-theme 3, it made me think about a carbon footprint that Sustainable Braintree actually calculated for the town I think it was like in 2008 or 2009, and as our sources of energy change over time, I think that's a better metric to look at overall. What's our reliance on renewable energy, as opposed to just measuring electric usage, gas usage, but looking at the big picture.
Are you doing core theme 5, though, the town facilities one?
Yes.
Yeah, number 3.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you said core theme 3. Got it.
Sub
Okay.
theme.
That's okay, I get it now. You're right, thank you.
Dave, sorry.
Yep. In each of these, what I think I was getting at when I was answering them is an emphasis on the budgeting for the applicable departments. So for instance, how much money are we spending on the issues that are discussed in number 5? I mean, we can figure that out pretty easily by just reviewing our current budgets. And for budgets that do not have a capital improvement component to them, then some of them probably need a capital improvement component added to them. But with respect to, for instance, water and sewer on number 3 and/or BELD in number 3, I'm sure they have a capital improvement component to each of their budgets already. And monitoring how much we spend on capital improvements for water, sewer, stormwater, and electric infrastructure would be something that addresses this issue. So I guess the idea that I have for all of these really is address it through the budget process.
Thank you. Erin?
Just a metric for core theme 5 with regards to maintenance of modern and accessible town buildings. 2 metrics. One would be to track the age and condition of all public spaces and buildings, and then also to track the percentage of facilities that are completely accessible. And maybe there is room in that for saying, I know some spaces might have accessible areas, but the entire building isn't accessible. I think we should break that down and know what facilities need to be targeted for accessibility upgrades.
Joe, I'm sorry.
Yep.
Councilor Reynolds.
Okay, thank you, that was quick. I'm going to talk about the same one, and I don't want to repeat what Erin had said. She had some really great ideas there. But again, it's the assessment, I think, that we have to do that sets the mark where we are, and that has to do with age, the structural integrity, the technology, again, which is tied into the age, and I think the accessibility is a great goal. So we improve the accessibility, and if we're building new technology or implementing significant technology, that we are making those into the standards of green technology that are renewables. But there has to be a measure, a metric measure of when do you make that move of saying we have to destroy, we have to tear down and rebuild, or what is the economic number we look at that says it makes it sense? So those are the measures that I would say.
I agree with all that, and I would, I'm going to go to number 5. Town officials must respect the residents. I think, present company excluded, that there should be some accessibility metrics when the community is having an issue, to timeframes and return phone calls and interaction in general. There should be some metrics, like in my business, we say 2 hours is too long. So I say 2 days is too long to return a phone call from a town official. That's my metric. Raina?
The only metric that I came up with really also had to do with how much we're spending you know, basically for each thing. And I'll just add this little thing is that we talked a little bit about how we're doing with our carbon footprint, you know, our building codes and our the LED classifications. We might at some point want to look at how we're implementing those, and those address building efficiency in use of energy and different things. So you know what I'm talking about, right? I can't explain what LEED stands for, but a lot of building codes use these classifications. You know, there's like what gold, platinum,
Oh,
silver.
LEED, I think you're talking about LEED
LEED, yeah.
certification.
Yeah, LEED certification. So we might be able to, I don't even know if we have that, but I mean, that's a way to monitor, especially, and that can be improvements. It's not always just new construction. So that's my one thing.
Liz?
I think one of the things that we really have to think about is controlling our water usage and measuring how much any new development is going to use, and where we've got a tri-town now, we've got to also consider new developments in those towns as well. And so I think that needs to be a unit of measure and something that we watch very closely and monitor so that we don't have a problem down the road with that. And other than that, I would agree with everything that all the previous speakers have said.
Justine?
Number 2, as field service specials, the town's responsible rate measurement on number of reported incident versus resolutions to the public safety perspective, and also percentage of return for facility improvement. Example, we built a lot of electrical charger on our school, but they never turn on. What are those measurements? Do we put in new technology just to look good, or are we looking for return on investment on things that we put in?
Thank you. And we will move into public comments. Thank you for sticking it out with us. We appreciate it. Not to put you on the spot, but if anyone wants to speak. Do you want to come to the podium? Do you have any other thoughts? Oh.
Crobin Kamara, and I live in Randolph with my husband Jesse, and I'm a former recent state candidate, state Senate candidate. So I actually did very well for the first time out where no one knew my name. So I won 7,000 votes and 40% for the vote. So I care about Braintree a lot, and I'm going to all the towns to educate myself, to know the people and see what the issues are. And I'm just amazed. It's very organized. I've heard some great comments, so thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sticking it out with us.
I'm Randolph Town Councilor Jesse Gordon, and I'm on the Randolph Master Plan Implementation Committee. We did our Master Plan Steering Committee like yours 5 years ago. And we kind of let it go for a few years and restarted the implementation process last year. The message I got from this group, which I've taken extensive notes on, is about the metrics that you talked about for each of the plans. I've been working with our plan, our master plan for a year and a half now. And we have sort of verbal goals like you do without metrics. And I think that metrics are really an important missing piece. And I'm certainly going to add that in Randolph. I think it's really, and I would encourage you to do the same here, that the metrics are, it's really something that without a metric, where do you go? We go to each agency, we do a little roadshow like you're proposing, and we just finished it last year, and we say, did you do it or not? And it's kind of a yes or no. And without a metric, there's only yes or no. There's not any sort of measurement of progress, and I think that's really important. And that's all my comments for tonight.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming. Okay, next. Okay, the next meeting is February 23rd. And does anyone want to make a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Anyone opposed? Okay, the meeting is adjourned. Great,
And you can
thank
give
you.
us give Melissa, I think, right? All the sheets?
Oh, yeah, and
Yeah.
I'll scan them.
Yeah.
And I'll circulate them to everybody. We might actually have some from Shelley, too. I know